Nick, a very warm welcome to you from Mumbai, India. Nick Barnard is speaking to us this evening from the United Kingdom, from London. And it's a great pleasure to have you with us, Nick. I'm delighted that you accepted our invitation. So on behalf of the trustees and the chairperson of the CSMBS, the Director General, Mr. Sabyasachi Mukherjee, on behalf of my executive committee at the Museum Society of Bombay, and on my own behalf, and on behalf of all the guests who have joined us here this evening, thank you so very, very much for so readily agreeing to give us this lecture. We're really, really looking forward to it. It's a topic that is dear to our hearts, and you come from a museum, the V&A, which is also dear to our hearts. So thank you so much. We'd just like to say a few words about this evening's lecture. The V&A's outstanding collection of jewelry from the Indian subcontinent was put together over a period of nearly 2 centuries. However, the type of jewelry accessioned and the reason for doing so have changed considerably over the years. The South Kensington Museum, now known to us as the V&A, bought its first examples of Indian jewelry from the Great Exhibition of 1851 and was dedicated to improving the quality of British design and taste by showing the best examples from around the world. In 1879, it absorbed a large collection from the former Indian Museum in London, which was set up by the East India Company in 1801, which had also been collecting jewelry, much of it via the Paris Universal Exhibition of 1855 and later 1867. The enthusiasm for Indian jewelry in Victorian Britain can be seen in the context of a fashion amongst the British public for wearing it, which reached a peak in the 1880s. By 1900, the days of mass purchases from exhibitions were really over. The museum moved away from contemporary jewelry to focus on more historical and courtly jewelry. The V&A has really been blessed. Recently, their scope has been transformed by the magnificent and remarkable collection of 20th century folk jewelry donated to them by the late Dr. Waltraud Ganguly's gift. It's rooted in her encyclopedic study of traditional ear ornaments of the states of India. And this talk will illustrate the highlights and the key moments in the development of the collection from its colonial origins to present times. Please indulge me. Nick, you have lots of friends who have joined the webinar this evening, and we're all looking forward to seeing you and hearing you. Nick Barnard is a curator of South Asian art in the Asian department of the Victoria and Albert Museum. He specializes in South Asian jewelry and sculpture and the arts of the Jain religion. His book, Indian Jewelry, the V&A Collection, was published in 2008. His burgeoning interest in jewelry having been greatly encouraged in 2004 by our very own Crafts Council of India convention titled Grass to Gold, Jewelry Through the Ages. And I think some of those members have also joined us this evening from Chennai. He has written numerous articles and contributions to books on a wide range of subjects, from jewelry to Jain art and Buddhist sculpture. And most recently, his chapter, which appeared in Julia Hedgewall's edited book, In the Footsteps of the Masters, Footprints, Feet, and Shoes as Objects of Veneration in the Arts of Asia. Nick has a lovely title to his chapter, The Lotus Feet of Srinathji, Footprints of Hindu Deities in Indian Jewelry. In 2011, he carried out a redisplay of the V&A's South Asian Sculpture Gallery and has curated various displays such as Jain manuscript pages and paintings in June 2010-2012, and Musical Wonders of India, a digital exhibition and display co-curated with Darbar Arts Cultural Heritage in 2015. Of course, he regularly lectures for the V&A and for SOAS. Nick, I always put in a plug. One more lecture, maybe on Jainism, maybe on Buddhism, maybe how you just rearrange the new galleries. There's always a learning for all of us in that. So once more, on behalf of CSMVS and MSM, thank you so much for so readily agreeing to my request. I know we had various common friends who also spoke to you about the Museum Society in Mumbai. So thank you very, very much. And ladies and gentlemen, before I hand you over to Nick, technical team, I don't know what we would do without you. So thank you very, very much for helping us through these last arduous 18 months. And I would like to specially mention this evening, Aishwarya, Mrinalini, Yashraj, of course, soldiering on ahead and guiding all of us is Professor Jason John, who's our Honorary Secretary and a lecturer at Xavier's. The vote of thanks will be given by my colleague, another stalwart of our society, Professor Dr. Anita Rane Kothari. So tech team, thank you so much, and sit back and enjoy this lecture. Thank you very, very much, Nick. Great appreciation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. This very, very kind introduction. That's very generous, and I'm really excited to have this opportunity to speak to you today about Indian jewellery in the V&A's collection. I think it's been so difficult for all of us in the last couple of years, and no one's been able to travel, and all these extra difficulties in our lives, and so much suffering as well. But it's really wonderful to be able to connect online in this way, which I think in some ways is making it easier to connect people than before we got used to these new systems, which sometimes let us down, but most of the time they work. So I'm hoping that this is going to, all the technology gods will be on our side this evening. So thank you again for this wonderful introduction and the really exciting opportunity to talk for the Museum Society of Mumbai tonight. And thank you to everyone for coming to this lecture. And I look forward to sharing this material with you and to hearing your questions. So if I may, I will make a start. I'm going to share my screen, and just bear with me for a few moments, please. So I'll be talking to you about the Victoria and Albert Museum's collection. I'm sure some of you will be familiar with it. The V&A first opened in South Kensington in 1857, having been grown out of the collections of the slightly earlier Museum of Manufactures. And the collection was housed in these buildings from the 1850s, but the building you see here is actually the frontage designed by Aston Webb and completed in 1909. And it was when the foundation stone for that part of the museum was laid in 1899 that the South Kensington Museum, as it was then called, was renamed Victoria and Albert Museum. And since then, it's been very often known as the V&A. So this is a view from the museum garden showing some of the oldest buildings in the museum. This is the lecture theatre block, which contained the original main entrance of the museum, which was built in the 1860s. Indian jewellery is displayed in the South Asia Gallery. This shows the central area of the gallery, which we call the Treasury. And this gallery was opened in 1990, replacing some earlier galleries. So the South Kensington Museum's collections of Indian jewellery began, or Indian art at all, began with purchases from the Great Exhibition of the Works and Industry of All Nations, which was held in London in 1851. The Great Exhibition was seen by over 6 million visitors from around the world, and it provided the first major exposure of Indian jewellery to the British public. It took place in the famous Crystal Palace building, which was constructed for the purpose. So in line with the ideas of the exhibition, the new museum, which was formed around this time, aimed to improve the standards of British design, manufacture and public taste, which were thought to have fallen down behind those of some of its competitors, particularly the French, who were considered to have been producing better designed artifacts at this time. So they wanted to show the best examples of products from around the world in order to raise standards. And this linked with the design reform movement, which had as its core principle the idea that the form of any object should be suitable to its function. So the Indian display in the Great Exhibition created a sensation, and design reformers such as Owen Jones, in his book The Grammar of Ornament, included examples of good design from around the world, including India and the Middle East. This is a watercolour showing a view of the Indian Court and Jewels by Henry Clark Pidgeon in 1851. And visitors to the Great Exhibition were excited by the opulence and splendour of Indian jewellery, and the commentaries such as the Illustrated Exhibitor saw the crowning point of the Indian display as being the dazzling array of enormous emeralds, superb pearls, rubies, sparkling diamonds, and exquisitely worked silver filigree. There was also a much wider range of pieces on display, as well as the most spectacular courtly jewels that were shown. So the Indian displays were highly admired, including textiles and arms and armour. And in 1852, after the exhibition closed, the new museum bought objects for its growing collections. And the largest number of objects that it bought from the Great Exhibition were from India. The 6 pieces of Indian jewellery were added to the new collections. And the ornaments were carefully chosen to support the museum's purpose of improving the quality of British design by exhibiting the best examples from all around the world. And these are all more or less new at the time, presumably having been made for the exhibition. And they're the beginning of a tradition of collecting contemporary design rather than more historical artifacts, which was dominant in the early days of the museum. The catalogue of the new acquisitions was published in 1853 as the first report of the Department of Practical Art, of which the museum was a branch. And it commented on why the pieces were thought to exemplify the principles of good design. So this beautiful enamelled anklet from Kangra was admired for the nicely contrasted blue, green, silver and gold, the playful arrangement of forms, and the judicious position of the pendant drops, alternating with the lines of ornament within the bands so that no direct line ran out of the subject. And they really tried to apply these, what they saw as scientific principles of good design to the objects. And you can see that in the catalogue. In this example, another anklet from Kangra, there's even a diagram of a section through the anklet to help analyse its aesthetic virtues and the supposed limitations. So the lines of the anklet and its pretty bands of ornament were admired, but they criticised the serpent's heads chasing the swans at the top. So it's quite very particular kind of viewpoint that they were applying to the jewels at this time. 4 of the pieces selected from the Great Exhibition were enamelled and came from the northern half of the Indian subcontinent. And that reflects a clear preference among these British design reformers who saw that the northern Indian objects as being the best designed. Professor Gottfried Semper, a famous German art critic, singled out the enamel bracelets shown here for their harmonious colouring and ornamentation. And enamel, especially enamel from Jaipur in Rajasthan, and the treatment of colour in Indian jewellery were consistently praised by British critics over the next few decades. Professor Maskelyne said, another important critic, praised the ruby red enamel of Lahore and Jaipur, favouring it over that of Paris. And George Birdwood, who was the curator of London's Indian Museum, another influential commentator, wrote in 1880 that enamelling is the master art craft of the world, and the enamels of Jaipur in Rajputana rank before all others and are of matchless perfection. So these 2 bracelets were actually sent to the Great Exhibition by the Maharaja of Dholpur in Rajasthan, but the work seems very typical of Jaipur enamel, so it's very likely that they were actually enamelled by a Jaipur enameller, possibly working in Dholpur. We don't know, unfortunately, the details of how they were made. The royal blue, which you see on these ornaments is a relatively new development. It was very popular in Victorian England, but it's less typical of traditional Indian enameling on gold, in which red, white, and green are the most favoured colours. But these are the kind of changes that were happening in Indian jewellery by the mid-19th century. The south of India was represented by the striking gold necklace from Kerala on the left of this picture. The report was surprisingly critical. It conceded that the necklace was very beautiful, but it claimed that it was less perfect than the Burmese gold necklace on the right, as it had less design in it. They criticised the repetition of the same forms, which they thought made it more monotonous. And unlike the Burmese necklaces, whose lines alternated and diminished in bulk towards the edge, in the necklace from Kerala, the lines radiated out from the center, getting larger towards the margin. But they said this is judiciously corrected by the pattern being more open towards the extremities. So it's surprising when you see such a beautiful necklace that they made these criticisms. But again, they're responding to these very particular ideas about design principles which they were trying to apply to these pieces. Now, I want to say a bit about the context in which the new museum was collecting its jewellery from 1852. Now, Queen Victoria had been given jewels that were taken from the Lahore treasury by the East India Company after the annexation of the Punjab. And she was becoming interested, therefore, in Indian jewellery. And there were various Indian dignitaries present at her court at certain times who sometimes wore their jewels, and that was of great interest to her. In 1854, Maharaja Dalip Singh came to England, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with the rather sad story behind that. And he was painted by the German artist Winterhalter in 1854, wearing some splendid jewels. Then Princess Gaurama, the daughter of the former Raja of Coorg, was also at the court and was painted wearing jewels by Winterhalter in 1852 as well. And the reason that I mention all this, it's a little remote from the V&A's collection, but the royal tastes and preferences of the time were very influential on what the public thought about jewellery, and the way that influenced the growing taste for Indian jewellery, as they saw the way that it was being worn and the interest that it created in the royal court. That sort of percolated downwards through British society. And I'm sure it had a close connection with what the museums were collecting. So among the wedding gifts for Princess Alexandra on her marriage to the Prince of Wales in 1863 was a suite of Indian personal ornaments, which were given to her by Queen Victoria. As I said, royal interests were very influential on British fashion, and they helped to spread that widening taste in the public. So the Indian jewellery was also shown in the next great London exhibition, the International Exhibition of 1862, which is shown in this painting here, and included pieces lent by various private British and Indian individuals and notables, and by jewellers. And this included a collection of objects from central India lent by Sir Robert Hamilton, who'd been the resident and later Governor General's agent for central India. And writers continue to write, British critics tend to write in overwhelmingly admiring terms about Indian jewellery. Charles Locke Eastlake wrote an influential book called Hints on Household Taste in 1867, which had a huge readership. It was influential in the development of the aesthetic movement in Britain. And Eastlake commented on the jewellery lent by Sir Robert Hamilton. They were mainly pieces from Bhopal and Indore, and he thought they were remarkable for their elegance and the appropriateness of design, which the British jewellers would do well to imitate, according to Eastlake. And he mentioned a necklace composed of 7 gold pendants, 6 of them set with emeralds and rubies, one with pearl clusters, and attached by a chaste link. And he notes that in Indian work, gemstones, unlike those in British work, were left either completely uncut or just trimmed sufficiently for their setting. And he says, the notion of grinding and paring gems down to a uniform size for a necklace or bracelet is a thoroughly modern and European one, and helps to render our jewellery formal and uninteresting. So he's really admiring the qualities of Indian gem setting, as well as the jewellery design itself. And he likes the way that the gems were set they were matched closely in size, but never with scrupulous accuracy. And the varying in the outline of the settings, which add greatly to the interest. And the irregularity, the slight irregularities, is evidence of manual work, whereas in British fashionable jewellery of that time, most of it looked and was made by machine. So this is really speaking to a great passion for handmade jewellery, the skills of the craftsmen, which were rising in Britain in the second half of the 19th century. And Eastlake is really scathing about the waste of time and labour and precious material which was employed in Britain to make British jewellery to make stones look identical. He also commented on 11 little golden tablets, which are quite clearly examples of table work, or what was called in Britain Pertabgar work, which probably originated in Pratapgarh in Rajasthan, although it was also done in Indore and Ratlam in Madhya Pradesh. And he admires the spirit and skill of the drawings, and the way that the space that the ornament occupies balances in equal proportions the space of the ground in which it's relieved. So these are the kind of people who are influencing the way that the public and museum curators thought about Indian jewellery at this time, now in the 1860s. Here we've got some examples of table work. As I said, it's referred to the British as Pratapgarh work, and it probably originated in the late 18th or early 19th century in Pratapgarh. And it's a very interesting technique. It looks a little bit like enameling, but instead of heating coloured vitreous paste to fuse it to a metal base, as you do with enameling, in this case, the jeweller fuses a delicate openwork design chased with surface details in gold, cut out of a thin sheet of gold, and fuses it onto the top of a solid coloured glass base. And it's probably fused with the application of a little heat. And then the glass cell is contained in a silver gilt surround, which makes these little plaques suitable for use in a variety of ornaments, from jewellery to boxes and plates. So the many westernized articles, such as brooches, a type of ornament which was foreign to India, showed that Europeans were important consumers of this tableware work, but there are also traditional forms produced for the Indian market. And the new museum bought various examples of tableware, which was clearly popular in the 19th century. So also displayed at the 1862 exhibition were objects from a remarkable collection of Mughal hardstones, including jades and rock crystals and jewellery objects, which were amassed by Colonel Charles Seton Guthrie, who had retired from India in 1857 after serving the East India Company since 1828. And much of his collection eventually came into the V&A. So the collection included this stunning Mughal taweez, dated to the first half of the 17th century. It has prayers in Arabic and sized on the white nephrite jade on the back, whereas on the front, the nephrite jade is beautifully set with rubies and emeralds in gold, using the traditional Kundan setting system, which uses highly purified gold to set the gemstones into the ornament. It's in a traditional amuletic shape. There's a hole bored at the very top for a thread for it to be suspended from, and the crested bird may possibly be representing hoopoes, which are a Sufic motif associated with the court of Solomon. So Guthrie's collection was exhibited again at the Paris Universal Exhibition of 1867. So in tandem almost with the London exhibitions of 1855 and 1862, were two Paris Universal exhibitions of 1855 and 67. And this showing these objects helped to inspire a new movement in British jewellery design. From the late 1860s, more design influences from India began to be found in British jewellery, as they developed an interest in eclectic materials, including Egyptian and Japanese materials, as well as Indian. So Robert Phillips, a London jeweller, displayed a necklace, which you see on the left, whose plaques are closely modelled on the enamelling on the Mughal thumb ring in Guthrie's collection, which you see on the right. And both of these objects are now in the V&A collection. And a locket shown by Phillips in the 1867 exhibition, shown in black and white on the right, shows very close affinities with a Mughal mirrorback of the 18th century, which is also from Guthrie's collection. So firms such as Watherston and Brogden and Robert Phillips in the 1860s and early 1870s incorporated Indian tablework plaquettes in their jewellery. So here you see some beautiful tablework plaquettes perhaps from Pratapgarh or Ratlam or Indore, which have been incorporated in a British-made gold jewellery. And this necklace is now in the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge. And the four-leaf clover shape is, I think, something that I can't think of any examples of that shape precisely in Indian jewellery. So I think that the plaquettes must have been made to design for this necklace, perhaps, and then sent to Britain for this. And there are various other types of Indian jewellery being incorporated in English jewellery design. One of the most popular things was bangles. The word bangle in English comes from bangri in Hindi. There's a thought that they came via France and North Africa, but I think the use of the word bangle suggests that it's that a major route of transmission was from India to Britain. So this bangles became very ubiquitous in 19th century fashionable jewellery. So by the early 1860s, Indian jewellery was also attracting the attention of some artists, and particularly the pre-Raphaelite circle. Dante Gabriel Rossetti, one of the pre-Raphaelite artists, included Indian jewellery along with other ornaments of very eclectic origins in some of his paintings. This is a painting called The Bride or the Beloved, dating to 1865 to 6. And in the central female figure wears on her wrist the bracelet. You can see it nearest to the bracelet shown in the picture. This is the same bracelet, and it was given to the V&A by May Morris, who's the daughter of William and Jane Morris, who of course were very close friends of the artist Rossetti's. And Rossetti had bought this, this Indian bangle from or bracelet from one of the shops, curiosity shops in London. But he also borrowed jewellery from the collection of another artist who was a friend of his, whose name was George Price Boyce. And this South Indian type of bracelet with the two makara heads chasing the central jewel was very popular in Victorian Britain. We get various examples of that in collections of the time. Then Rossetti's painting Rosa Triplex, which was modelled by May Morris, who gave us the previous bracelet, shows the figure on the right wearing an Indian necklace of the 7-string or Satlara type. We can see here an example of a relatively modest example of the Satlara necklace in the V&A. Much of the jewellery that was listed in the catalogue of Rossetti's effects when he died in 1882 was described as Indian. But with these 19th century descriptions, you have to take them with a bit of a pinch of salt because they weren't very clear about what came from India and what might have been from China or elsewhere. Sometimes there's a bit of confusion. So others who painted or drew Indian jewellery included Edward Poynter, who made a picture of Helen of Troy. This is his second painting of the subject from 1887. And what's really fascinating about it is although the archaeological jewellery that had been excavated by Heinrich Schliemann at Troy was available, it wasn't considered to be sufficiently impressive for the painting that Poynter wanted to make of Helen of Troy, who was supposed to have been the most beautiful woman in the world. So Poynter actually used this necklace was actually an Indian design. And you can see bottom right, the necklace that was made for the paintings by a famous London jeweller called Carlo Giuliano, experimented with various different traditions of jewellery. But if you look closely at the plaques, you'll see that they're almost exactly the same design as a traditional ornament from Gujarat, which would have originally had 3 of these plaques. There's only one that survives. This is in the V&A collection. And it was Oppie Untrak, the great historian of Indian jewellery, who spotted the connection and realised that Giuliano's necklace was based on this traditional Gujarati silver type of necklace. So exhibitions continued to bring Indian jewellery into the public eye. The annual International Exhibition of 1872 in London, held just across the road from where the museum is now, showed a huge number of pieces of Indian jewellery from various sources. And the South Kensington Museum bought no less than 1,100 examples of jewellery from this exhibition. And I think when you look at the pieces there, it's interesting to see the wide range of types of ornaments that they're showing. Unlike the 1852 purchases, 6 very carefully chosen pieces, each of which were analysed closely for their design characteristics. They now were buying these huge numbers of jewellery from the exhibition. and immensely wide ranging. So we have these beautiful little filigree gold, gilt brass earrings from Bengal on the top left. Then below we have lac coloured red conch shell bangle, a marriage symbol from Bengal. Next to those at the top, we have a wonderful little wire work jewellery from Oud, from around Lucknow. And they have little glass beads strung in the glass wire, very rare survivors of that tradition. And of course, top right, a container used by a member of the Virashaiva community in Karnataka to carry a small portable Shivalinga. Below them, the most expensive and perhaps the most elaborate objects that the museum bought from the exhibition, these beautiful gold ruby set bangles from Tamil Nadu, which have these lovely little parrots facing a central lotus motif, really beautiful little pieces of jewellery. Then bottom left, these huge brass silver-plated anklets from the Koli community in Gujarat, which weigh, I think, around 1 kilogram each. And then next to them, two examples of jewellery in metal alloys. On the bottom right, a little toe ring, a little beautiful thing, but very different from the sorts of jewellery they were acquiring in 1852. So meanwhile, this interest in the handmade which had been inspired by Charles Locke Eastlake and his descriptions of the 1862 jewellery and others, had really caught on, I think, especially among members of the upper classes. And the members of this aesthetic movement admired Indian jewellery's handmade character compared to typical mass-produced Victorian jewellery. They bought things at the famous London shop of Liberty & Co., which is still there. It was established in 1875, and that stocked a wide variety of Indian jewellery. And here, a wealthy lady called Mrs. Luke Ionides, has been shown in a portrait of 1882 by Sir William Blake Richmond, and she's wearing typically aesthetic dress with this loose gown and holding beads, which were very popular with the aesthetes. And this is actually almost, yes, it's a Muslim rosary, which may possibly be of Indian origin. And you can see here the first catalogue of Liberty & Co. from 1881, which includes Indian silver bangles, beads and colour lacquer-made jewellery from the Lucknow district. The Liberty catalogue also lists gold inlaying on iron from the Sialkot district, known as Kuftkari work, and a Rudrakshamala necklace, or rosary rather, in the centre. So I'm sure you're familiar with the Rudrakshamala, the Eye of Rudra, the epithet of Shiva, a sacred ornament. It's quite strange to see it used in this sort of high Victorian fashion in this way, but these were very popular at that time. Is the Sialkot work, which was mentioned, is the Kuftkari work, which is a traditional technique which used to be used in arms and armour, but not originally for jewellery, and was practiced in Punjab and Rajasthan. But by 1862, it was being used in jewellery, which was being sold to Europeans. So hence you can see the shapes, the cross, the little buckle, the Celtic cross on the left, a lot of very strong European influences, but in this Indian technique, but pieces being made for European customers. The Prince of Wales toured India in 1875-6, and at this time the interest in things Indian greatly increased. There was the Great Imperial Darbar in Delhi in 1877. And so by 1880, there had been a lot of impetus for people to get interested in Britain, to get interested in Indian jewellery, and there were many more opportunities for them to see jewellery. There was a touring display which went all around the UK of the gifts of the gifts had been given to the Prince of Wales in his tour of India, which included some jewellery. And this touring exhibition was tremendously popular. The Paris Universal Exhibition of 1878, the next one, had a big Indian section, the core of which was a display of the gifts of the Prince of Wales. So you can see the kind of impact that these were having. And indeed, this tradition in a way sort of continues, because the Prince of Wales's gifts were the subject of a Royal Collections exhibition called Splendours of the Subcontinent, a Prince's Tour of India, 1875-6, which took place in 2017-18. The Prince of Wales's jewellery collection was described as not extensive, but excellent. according to the Queen Fashion magazine in 1876. By the late 1870s and 80s, Indian jewellery was fashionable beyond artistic circles, and it was widely owned, as you can see in the pages of the Queen Fashion magazine. And it included many notices from individuals who wanted to acquire or exchange Indian jewellery. A report in 1884 reported that Indian jewellery is much worn at present. Various factors have made this popular, the exhibitions which had shown it, and the interest of artists, aristocracy, royalty, etc. And Indian jewellery became much more widely available also through Swami work, which you could buy through a catalogue, but also there were two so-called Indian villages which were held in London in 1885 to 6 to show and demonstrate making of Indian crafts. So as I mentioned, the most famous shop was Liberty, and you can see their stall here at the Paris Universal Exhibition of 1889. So it's the next one of those. And also Procter & Co., whose display of Indian jewellery you can see on the right, also were among the various firms who were selling Indian jewellery. And of course, these Paris exhibitions were also attended by huge numbers of people, just as the London ones were. So even non-specialist dealers such as Silber & Fleming, who supplied goods ranging from a portable industrial railway to jewellery, sold Indian jewellery, including at the bottom of this illustration on the left, an Indian bangle with the makara heads of exactly the same type as these examples which are now in the V&A, including the gold one on the top left, which was the one given by May Morris to the museum and had been painted by Rossetti in his painting of the bride. So all this had been going on and big changes going on, but on the other side of London from the South Kensington Museum, another institution had also been collecting Indian jewellery. So we're going back in time to 1798, when the board of directors of the East India Company, whose headquarters were here at East India House in Leadenhall Street in the city of London, decided to set up an Oriental repository for manuscripts which were being collected by their employees in India. By 1801, this library had been joined by a museum, and they started collecting all sorts of artifacts and examples of natural history and raw materials, a very broad-ranging collection. So in 1798, the Times reported that a variety of pieces of jewellery forming a complete collection of ornaments used in Indian dress had been sent by the Peshwa, the Maratha Peshwa, to the directors of the East India Company, was being placed in this new museum. So this is probably the earliest reference to Indian jewellery being collected in either of these two museums. Unfortunately, we don't know where those jewels are now, and the bulk of the Indian Museum's collection was composed of articles that were purchased or commissioned for display in the two Paris Universal Exhibitions of 1855 and 1867. So the Indian Museum of Jewellery really comes in rather later. But this shows the extension of the Indian Museum, this sort of pastiche Mughal style that was built in 1858. So, of course, after the uprising, the East India Company lost its political control of India. And as a result of this, the Indian Museum building the Indian Museum collections were moved out of East India House and went into British government buildings. And they were moved from one building to another and became poorly housed with inadequate space. And eventually they were moved out of this cramped housing into new galleries in South Kensington in 1874-5, just across the road from the South Kensington Museum. So in 1879, the decision was made that enough was enough and the collections must be dispersed. And they were dispersed to the various London institutions. The British Museum took the archaeological material, the Natural History Museum, anything to do with animals. Kew Gardens took the plant specimens, but over 19,000 objects were transferred to the South Kensington Museum, now the V&A. The manuscript remains in the India Office Library, which is now part of the British Library. So this was a huge influx of objects being transferred, over 19,000 objects transferred to the South Kensington Museum, which included 2,300 pieces of jewellery, which is still around half of the V&A's collection. So here are some examples which you can see. There's the beautiful loop-in-loop armlet top left, some spiky armlets from Dehra Ismail Khan, which is now in Pakistan, and a hair ornament from Nagaur in central India on the right. So the new galleries were opened, which have been rearranged to accommodate the Indian Museum's collection, and they were opened by the Queen Victoria on the 15th of May 1880, and seen by over 300,000 visitors in the first 18 months. So a lot of people seeing these objects. And these would have again have helped to inform the British public about British jewellery and to influence them in their tastes. So perhaps the highlight of the Indian Museum material for the jewellery were the objects from the collection of Charles Seton Guthrie, which had been displayed in 1862 and 1867 at the exhibitions of London and Paris. In 1868, the Indian Museum bought 81 objects from Guthrie's collection, and Guthrie presented the Indian Museum with 2 objects, including the superb 18th century turban ornament, a jika or sarpesh. It's made of nephrite jade, and remember Guthrie's interests were in hard stones, so that's why he was collecting these. And it's inlaid with carved rubies, emeralds, and rock crystals set in gold, and with a beautiful pendant pearl at the tip, which gives this, although the imagery is floral, the sort of shape of it is rather feathery, and the design of these turban ornaments goes back to the kalgi, or the black heron's feather plume that royalty used to wear, at least in the 16th century. And by the early 17th century, they were beginning to wear turban ornaments in jade or gold with this sort of shape. And the long stem, of course, is to tuck into the folds of the turban of the wearer. The back is carved also with these floral designs, and there's a jade loop for containing a plume of heron's feathers or kalgi. This beautiful thumb ring was inset with precious stones. This is an 18th century example, again, of nephrite jade, set with gold, rubies, and emeralds, also from the Guthrie collection. And of course, again, it's an example of the Kundan process, using highly purified gold, which, because it's so purified, it's literally 24 karat, it could be worked at room temperature, and it's worked in with a fine chisel into the surrounding around the gemstones until it slightly overlaps the edge of the gemstone and holds it in place. Because the setting is closed, the gemstone must have either gold or coloured foil behind it, because no light shines through the setting. It needs to have something to reflect the light from the front. Another wonderful work from the Guthrie collection is this tiny little Mughal pendant of the 17th or 18th century. This size, it's only a few centimeters, so the extremely detailed enameled work that you can see on the back on the right, you can really appreciate that when you understand how tiny this is. And of course, it's set again with emeralds and rubies in gold on the front. So a really lovely little piece. And the collections contain very diverse materials. So this is a necklace made of glass beads with some brass bells at the bottom. Glass beads were worn prolifically by Adivasi groups. And one of the problems with the Indian Museum collections was, although they were immensely diverse, the records are often very lacking in detail, and it's very difficult to find out much information about the pieces. And often it could be quite inaccurate as well. This particular piece was recorded as being worn by the Bhil community. However, it would also have been worn by the Ratwa women from Gujarat. It's just a shame that they didn't record a lot more information at the time that they acquired these pieces. The combined collections included lots of bangles of glass and lac. They must be very rare survivors from the 19th century, because these objects are very light and fragile. So the lac can be coloured and worked in various different ways. And it's often, as with these examples, it can be set with little beads and glass mirrors. So it becomes really a work of art, despite being made with relatively inexpensive materials. The example on the right came into the collections later in 1917 with a set of ornaments from Kerala, from Malabar. Ivory bangles were popular in Rajasthan, but these examples, which are beautifully gilt and coloured, are from Ahmednagar in Maharashtra, dating from about 1866. And the collection includes plant seeds and beads, which were used in religious jewellery as well as Adivasi and folk jewellery. So there's another Rudrakshamala rosary at the top of the photograph, and on the right you can see a painting from an album of paintings from Tanjore made in about 1830, which shows a Virashaiva holy man from Karnataka wearing various necklaces and bracelets of Rudraksha beads, also carrying a Rudraksha Mala rosary. The bottom left ornament is from a set of ornaments belonging to a woman from the Lamani or Banjara community, and it came with a photograph you see on the bottom left of a woman of the community, which was, the photograph was taken in 1930. So the museum in the 1950s acquired this whole costume of the Banjara community. And the seed ornaments are of various types, and they were also made for sale to tourists, as well as consumption by various communities in India. The one on the left includes the devil's claw pendant, which is very dangerous for domestic animals, and the one with the orange tassel is actually, although the beads look very smooth, they're actually Rudraksha beads, which have been smoothed down for the sake of this, making this ornament. Now, the Indian Museum's collections concluded a lot of objects that showed aspects of European influence. Some were made for the European customers, and others were pieces that innovative styles that incorporated new techniques that from Europe. So these European type rings were actually made in Chennai, designed, but must have been designed for European customers, perhaps specifically for the exhibition that they were sent to. This would have been the Paris exhibition of 1855. So the large number of Europeans, particularly women now living in India, created a large demand for European jewelry types in India. And you could see that these rings are set with the claw setting techniques with an open back to emit light through the gem. And that was a new sort of gem setting technique introduced to India at this time, compared to the traditional closed settings that were used in India. The various different types of ornaments, particularly brooches, not a traditional Indian type, were introduced to India by European customers in the 19th century. Particularly stunning is the dragonfly brooch at the top, and this is a sort of European motif that was very popular in the first half of the 19th century and began to be made in India. But it's got particular aspects of recognizably Indian design, such as the little groups of 3 gold granules that go along the edge of the wires along its wings, very beautiful and very often seen in traditional Indian jewelry. And it also has a feature called kanati work. You might be able to see spreading downwards from that second wire from the top, little gold granules of increasing size, very delicately done, which was a type of jewelry done in France, which remained popular in India for longer than it did in Europe. So interesting little differences in techniques that you can see with the Indian made jewelry sometimes, even when it's of a type that was made for the European market. And then sometimes these European techniques were used in Indian types of jewelry. Here's a jhumar, a head ornament, but this uses open claw setting for the gemstones instead of traditional setting. And where the central pendant at the bottom would traditionally be a fish shape, here they've actually used a cross. So there are aspects of European influence coming in here. And here in this jewelry from Calcutta, this is probably been inspired by cut steel work, which was developed in England in the late 18th century and became very fashionable in continental Europe in the 19th. And it was done in steel, with the surfaces of the elements of the steel ornaments faceted to make it shine and reflect light. But in India, this was adapted to gold. So we have this sort of cut gold work, which has a rather wonderful effect. And then this technique, this is a traditional Indian technique. The Europeans called it barbel work. It's also called kikar or kardar work, which uses tiny little cones soldered en masse to these spheres, hemispheres, or pear drop shapes in gold. And this is the traditional shape, the gokru earrings, which were popular in Punjab and Rajasthan. But in about the 1840s, the technique began to be used for European ornaments, and barbel work became quite popular with British purchasers. It's supposed to have been inspired by the filaments of the flower of the acacia blossom, by the way. And it's so the ornament on the right, you can see it's a brooch, you can see the pin sticking out on the back side, and the Greek cross shape makes it very clearly a European sort of ornament, although it's using a completely Indian technique. But the one on the left shows a more subtle transformation with the crescent shape inspired by traditional Indian jewellery, and the little pendant with the 3 balls at the bottom is very clearly inspired by the traditional Gokru earrings. The same technique was used in jewellery which applied the ivory miniatures, which were very popular in Delhi among British customers in the mid-19th century. And they often showed people who were in the news, as well as showing images of Mughal emperors. So here we have an image of Maharaja Ranjit Singh of the Punjab Sikh kingdom on the left, and beside him is Prince Akbar Khan of Afghanistan, who actually threw the British out of Afghanistan in the mid-19th century. So these are, again, almost certainly jewels, earrings designed for a British customer. Then the hand motif is derived from the Romantic revival in Europe, popular from the 1820s to 50s, and is symbolic of love and friendship. Here it's employed in a chain from South India. An Indian chain work known as Trichinopoli chain was very popular with Europeans. Europeans were enthusiastic buyers of Swami work, with depictions of Hindu deities worked in high relief in silver gold. But these were used to decorate Western type ornaments. They were used for ornamentation rather than for just traditional jewelry and with its religious connotations. So the style was inspired by more traditional repoussé work images of Indian jewelry of gods in South Indian jewelry. The piece above is in gold, but the lower one is in silver, and it was acquired in 1855. So it's an unusually early example of Swami work surviving, because it really becomes most popular in Britain in the 1870s. And you can see here the catalogue of P. Orr & Sons. I think they may be still surviving in Chennai, actually. This is their 1877 catalogue, which states that Swami work was in continually increasing demand from all parts of India, from England, Australia, and America. And their work was among the gifts to the Prince of Wales in his 1875-6 tour, and they were among the leading producers of Swami work. They had a big factory in Chennai, I believe. So one of the most European types of jewellery was the silver filigree made in Cuttack. This was shown in the 1851 exhibition. It was basically entirely for European customers, and it uses these motifs of butterflies and flowers. And on the ornament on the right, there's a snake, then a butterfly, then a flower. The snake is just on the left edge, it's hard to see. So it's drawing motifs from European jewellery. And this, again, this brooch form that you see on the left is very much a European form, although of course filigree work in India has much older origins. It's just being applied in the 19th century to this export work. So we've seen that by the 1870s, late 1870s, Indian jewellery had become very fashionable in Britain and was widely available there. The presence in the Indian Museum collection of the examples we've just been looking at, showing so many types that were made for European customers or used European techniques, makes us ask, to what extent was the Indian jewellery fashionable in Britain by the late 1870s, simply the sort of jewellery that was actually being made for the European market? So types such as filigree that we've just seen were very popular, as was teva work seen on this brooch in the top left. Swami work was advertised in 1876 by the fashion magazine Queen as being the novelty of the season. And in 1884, a report in the Queen magazine on the popularity of Indian jewellery mentioned hat ornaments of tiger claw, as well as brooches and hairpins. You see a tiger claw necklace in the top right, as well as more traditional Jaipur enamel work and other types of Indian work. And also in this sort of weird scenario, Indian ornaments were put to unconventional new uses as they were adapted to the alien conditions of British costume and culture. For example, it mentions that silver bangles were used as parasol handles or knotted into the hair. Traditional jewellery had some popularity, especially if it was adapted to the European market. And Jaipur enamel was, of course, highly renowned and in great demand, such as these lockets. Again, it's a kind of European type, but they were made in Jaipur in 1875, and eventually these were actually bequeathed to the V&A by 1927 by Lord Curzon. Very beautiful design of There's more enameling on the back of these. And Indian silver ornaments and bangles were said to be wonderfully popular in 1883. But nonetheless, it's quite clear that a lot of this jewellery was of a rather hybrid nature. So despite the huge numbers of ornaments that came to the South Kensington Museum from the Indian Museum, the Indian Museum's collection was considered really defective. The reason for that is that important types of objects were not represented, especially traditional designs, as opposed to those made for the European markets. And a lot of the objects, the place of origin of many of the objects had not been accurately recorded, so they didn't know where a lot of the pieces had actually come from. So in 1880, it was decided to allocate £5,000 for a purchasing tour in India to remedy these deficiencies. And Caspar Purdon Clarke, an architect who designed the pastiche Indian pavilions for the Paris Universal Exhibition of 1878, was appointed to do this collecting trip. And he's a very bright man who's later described as a walking encyclopedia. And he bought 3,400 objects on his collecting tour, including 286 pieces of jewellery. These beautiful head ornaments from Pune and below in Bangalore, with the lovely image of Krishna sucking his toe in the centre of the Shishpur from Bangalore. The lovely Gilli Ole earrings from Bangalore or Bengaluru, and below them the Bulak nose ornament from Kulu, very rare example of a nose ornament in the V&A's collection. Very, very few of these in the early collections. A gold marriage necklace from Madurai came from Purdon Clarke's prejudices, and it has these cylindrical amulet shapes, which are very ancient, and the various pendants, each of which brings good fortune and protection. The necklace has two interesting features, or particularly interesting features in addition to this. The cylindrical amulet containers can't be opened. Originally, they would have been, such amulet containers would have contained a roll with a mantra written on it and could be opened and closed. But by this time, they were making the shape of the amulet containers without actually being able to open them or for them to contain prayers. The other is that it's described as a marriage necklace, but it actually lacks the Thali pendant, which in South India, as I'm sure many of you will know, is the key element of marriage jewellery. And we could see this, that not long afterwards, in 1894, E.B. Havel published on his articles on South Indian jewellery, he published a beautiful example of a similar marriage necklace. And you could see that this, at the bottom of it, has the Thali pendant quite clearly. So the museum was perhaps not aware that some of the jewellery it was acquiring was actually incomplete. Now, as a design museum, the museum had a great interest in how things were made. And Purdon Clarke himself was later described, it was said that he knows how everything is made. And this interest in making is shown by the set of goldsmith's tools that Purdon Clarke bought on his collecting tour. And he bought tools for various craftsmen. There are also textile makers and carpenters' tools. And the tools were actually accompanied by a life-size clay models of craftsmen, which had been made in Krishnagar in Bengal. The tools include a draw plate for wire of various grades, which is made from a refashioned saw blade. Below that, a die for beading wire and a blowpipe, and then scales with their wooden container. And in this picture of the South Kensington Museum's Indian galleries in 1890, you can see two of the models of craftsmen at the back, including in the centre, the model of the goldsmith. Now, by the end of the 19th century, the days of buying huge numbers of contemporary objects from international exhibition and the ambitious collecting trips in India appeared to be over. In the early 20th century, especially from around 1920, the collection takes a really new direction under the influence of Caspar Purdon Clarke's son, who was called Caspar Stanley Clarke. From especially the 1920s, the museum focused on more historical and courtly jewellery and collecting only small numbers of the very finest examples. This outstanding Rajasthani enamel turban ornament is one of 6 turban ornaments purchased from AFS Taliyar Khan, who'd reportedly bought them from the Maharaja of Jaipur and sold them to the V&A in 1922-3. The turban ornament is an example of the exquisite enamelling from Jaipur with its wonderful ruby red colour. The flower calyxes around the edge might have originally contained pearls, and it's possible because of its distinctive shape that this ornament was originally made to adorn an image of Krishna. One of the most important historical objects was an inscribed imperial gemstone known by the museum as the Carew spinel. The spinel is quite different from the ruby, comes in huge sizes, and it's often eulogized in Persian poetry for its association with wine and the sun, and they were prized above all other stones in the Mughal treasuries. The Carew spinel was presented to the museum by Lady Carew in 1922. It had been bought from a merchant in Tehran, Iran, in the 1860s by her great uncle Charles Allison, who was the British ambassador to Iran. So spinel weighs 133.5 carats, and it's carved with very tiny but perfectly controlled Persian inscriptions bearing the titles of Mughal emperors who owned it: Jahangir, with 2 inscriptions, Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb. The diamond at the top and the cord it's set with are later editions, probably of the 19th century. In 1927, the V&A was bequeathed half of the collection of Lord Curzon, former Viceroy of India. These massive ceremonial silver anklets from Gujarat are unusual, not just for their massive size, but also for the inscription inside, which has a Gujarati inscription saying that they were made by Har Govind Hira, a Loha, at Dabhoi in Barodas. And it's very unusual in Indian jewellery for the name of the jeweller to be recorded, and especially for it to be actually inscribed in an inscription. So this is probably because it's a ceremonial presentation piece, probably made to be presented to Curzon. And of course, these silver anklets have these lovely makara heads as the terminals. And in the 1940s, the V&A collected a few archaeological pieces of jewellery, especially associated with the area around Taxila in Pakistan, because there was a great deal of interest in Britain in Gandhara and its cultural, its artistic heritage. So the gold plaque, gold pearls and garnets, shows the Buddhist goddess Hariti and dates from around the 1st to 4th centuries. And Hariti is holding a lotus on the left and a cornucopia, a Greek symbol of fertility, because of course a lot of objects from Gandhara incorporate a lot of artistic fashions from classical Greece and Rome. And she wears a tunic, which may be Hellenistic or classical. And then the back has a beautiful design of a lotus. And it's interesting that there's a very similar, slightly different in size, but similar in design pendant, which is in the Cleveland Museum in Ohio, US. And objects from the collection of Colonel D.H. Gordon, who owned this beautiful pendant, was shown in the Art of India and Pakistan exhibition, which was held at London's Royal Academy in 1948, following independence in 1947. In 1982, a superb pair of turban jewels from Murshidabad was purchased. It's a rare datable example from the 18th century because it was presented by the new Nawab of Bengal, Mir Jafar, to Admiral Charles Watson in July 1757, after the Battle of Plassey, in which, as I'm sure you know, the former ruler Siraj ad-Dawla had been deposed in favour of Mir Jafar. Watson's role had been as the commander of the British fleet. The wonderful jewels are diamonds, rubies, emeralds, and this enormous sapphire in the centre, which is very unusual for Indian jewellery, for traditional Indian jewellery, because of course, as you know, as many of you will know, the Saturn is a potentially unlucky jewel because its association with Shani and the way that the potentially malign influences from the planetary deity can be challenged through the stone. I wouldn't wish to suggest that it was anything more than pure coincidence. That I think Watson died not long after. But it's beautiful work with this gem setting, and you can see that the back, as is absolutely typical of ornaments from the northern half of India, is enamelled. If you look at the design of the lower ornament, the sarpati, it shows this kind of rather geometrical floral design, and this has probably been influenced by the kind of neoclassical designs in Britain that were being pioneered by designers such as Robert Adam. And on the right, you can see a photograph of the floor designed by Robert Adam of Newby Hall in Yorkshire in northern England. So these designs may have been transmitted through architecture, through buildings made for British customers living in India. Of course, the enamel in the jika, the upper part of the two turban jewels, is traditional in its design. So it's an interesting combination. In the late 1980s, the museum bought some outstanding examples of South Indian gold jewellery, types which were previously completely lacking from the collection. This is part of one of the very heavy and valuable gold necklaces that were produced for the Nathukote Chettiar community in Tamil Nadu. It's called a Kayuturu or Kalitiru. And it is really splendid, but it's as I said, incomplete. The full set would have originally had 31 pendants, then later which would have been given to a girl on marriage, but after perhaps the conception of the first child, another 3 pendants would have been given to add number to 34, which were worn in 2 loops, one above the other. So this single loop of 10 is a much reduced version, and a smaller version of the necklace was given to a girl of about 10 or 12 at I sort of, forgive my pronunciation, but Thiruvatirai Pudamai ceremony, sort of coming of age ceremony. And I would love to know what the story was, why this necklace in its incomplete form was sold. There may be a very sad human story behind that, why this necklace was never completed as a marriage necklace. But if you look at the pendant, there's really beautiful South Indian Nakashuvalai repoussé work with this wonderful image of Shiva and Parvati on the back of the bull Nandi. And above their heads, you can see the superstructure of a Gopurama, a temple tower. Really fine work, and it's pierced through so that you can see behind it red foil. Above that is a contrasting piece with a flat work where you have this wonderful image of an antelope turning back among foliage, being flanked by 2 wonderful birds of paradise. And that is also pierced, but behind it is perhaps some copper, some greenish metal. So you have red showing through behind the bottom part of the ornament, and then a greenish metal above the top half. So it's really, really wonderful workmanship, and a very large pendant, I think about 10 centimeters high, this pendant alone. And on the back is the inscription belonging to the woman who it belonged to. And another highly distinctive ornament type used in the south by certain communities in the south of Tamil Nadu is the Pambadam ear ornament. And it's, as the name implies, it's based on the form of a snake. So if you look on the top left, you can see the head of a cobra with the 2 eyes and the snout, and the sort of U shape beneath it is the side of the cobra's hood. And the idea is the snake is coiled up and sitting on a nest of eggs. So this piece is, with its geometrical forms, although it belongs to the 19th or mid-20th century, it's very traditional. Nonetheless, it looks extremely modern in its designing, attracts a lot of comment for that reason. It's, as you can see, over 5 centimeters in size. So, of course, it's not solid gold, but filled with wax. So it's not as heavy as you would have think that it might be. But this is the only example of this type of ornament that was acquired by the museum in the 19th or 20th centuries. This kind of ornaments are very, very rare in the collection. Another type that was added in 1995 were several examples of silver jewellery from Western India with really interesting types and fascinating techniques which had not previously been represented in the collection at all. This Western Indian coiled necklace is a varlo worn by Meghwal and Muslim pastoral communities in Kutch, made of coiled wire and weighing 730 grams. So this is the last section of the lecture. I fear I'm overrunning a bit, so please don't hesitate to interrupt me if you need me to stop. But I just wanted to finish up by talking about the wonderful addition to the collection by Dr. Valtraud Ganguly, a very dear lady who very sadly passed away in 2015. And those of you who were at the Grass to Gold conference will of course know Valtraud from her wonderful presentation there. And she collected an enormous collection of Indian jewellery, and mainly 20th century jewellery, starting with collecting earrings in the 1990s. She did very extensive field work, travelling all over India, with her husband Shubrata acting as translator for her and helping her with her research. So she aimed to document the various regional traditions of Indian earrings, partly because of her admiration for the beauty of these ear ornaments, and partly because she was concerned that many of the regional types and traditions were disappearing and being replaced by more standard nationwide types of ornaments. Her collecting extended to other types of ornament and finally focused on nose rings. And Valtrud very kindly gave her collection to the V&A in 2015, just a few months before she died. So it's a tremendous, in very sad circumstances, but it's a tremendous addition to the V&A's collection. So Valtrud published several books. On the left is her seminal catalogue of Indian ear ornaments. Next is an update of the great articles on Indian jewellery that were written by Thomas Holbein Henley in 1906 to 1909. This is a centenary exhibition, which Valtrud updated by comparing the 19th century examples published by Henley with 20th century examples from her own and other private collections. Then the Indian folk jewellery is the catalogue of an exhibition that took place in German, Hanau, near Frankfurt in Germany. And then finally, nose rings, her last work, which was completed in her last year, and was a catalogue of the nose rings in the same way that the jewellery was researched. So as well as collecting jewellery, Dr. Ganguly took many photographs to show women and also men wearing jewellery so that the regional types and traditions could be thoroughly understood. And this shows a really different approach from the V&A collecting, where we saw originally particular ornaments being selected only as examples of good design, and later as beautiful and historically significant ornaments. Valtrud aimed to document earrings and collect examples from all the regional traditions of India, a comprehensive approach aimed at recording all the traditional ear ornament types before they disappeared or were modernized or changed. And she took a similar, though less extensive approach to the nose ring. So this is really thorough and wide-ranging research. And before 2015, the V&A collection included very few nose rings. This may have been because they would not have sold at European exhibitions in the 19th century, because they're not the sort of jewellery that European women would have worn. So the Ganguly collection is a very important addition for us. She used a regional approach for nose rings as she had for earrings, but she noted that nose rings are not so specific to certain communities, and they don't carry the same traditional symbolism or religious meanings that earrings do. They're more widespread and connected perhaps more to the level of society of the owner. But this type, from along northern India, from Himalayas and the Punjab, the fish and peacock design you see here is found. So you see the fish at the bottom with a peacock sitting on its back. Though she also notes that the fish that she had heard from one jeweler, the fish design was relatively modern, because this is made of gold glass with turquoise and pearls. Another type of nose ornament is the bulak, which is worn in the scepter. We saw one example from Purdon Clark collection earlier, and it hangs down over the mouth. So this example is probably from Himachal Pradesh, where the type is very commonly seen, as well as the naat, which we saw in the last slide. The crescents are typical of this region, as are the leaf pendants, the gold leaf pendants which hang down. Motiwala earrings are very popular, using multiple pearls, especially in Western India and Sindh. And Ganguly wrote that the most spectacular motiwalas were worn in Sindh. The larger form of naat, which we see here, is called the bali. And this example has a chain to hook it up in the hair for extra support. And it has a peacock design, which you can also see chased on the gold on the back. Very distinctive designs are seen in Gujarat. This has a pleated crossbar with beautifully applied wires and very impressive granulation work, both on the central wire and on the discs below. It closely resembles a nose ring that Ganguly identified as the Ramasai Vinto, which will be worn by a Jadeja Rajput. This beautiful nose ring was assigned to central India by Ganguly. She noted the abundant use of pearls in Hyderabad and wrote that a combination of Deccan and Rajasthan features results in a harmonious and aesthetic overall design. To give you an idea of size, this weighs 39 grams, so it's quite heavy, actually slightly heavier than the larger earring that we just saw. and it's about 7 by 8 centimeters, made of gold, pearls, diamonds, and glass. This very beautiful little earring is from Tamil Nadu, and Ganguly noted that nose rings are small and mainly used in marriage ceremonies and by Bharatanatyam dancers. Little stickers are preferred for daily use. Small, elegant crescents with stones and a fringe of pearls are quite typical for southern India. And on the back, again, the peacock design has been very elegantly chased in. The small but very attractive nose ring. Ganguly's great passion was for the earrings of India, which is the last part of my talk. Her detailed photographic documentation means we can understand much better how the ornaments were worn by particular communities. This lady from Tamil Nadu wears several ear ornaments, including the very large ear ornament called mudichu, which is worn in her deliberately stretched earlobes. A fine pair of mudichu from the Ganguly collection is seen top left. The word apparently means knot, and they're worn in Kanyakumari district in Tamil Nadu by Teva women who get them aged about 15, according to Ganguly. They have very beautiful braided wire work, and this is apparently a specialism of Nagarkoil or Satan Kulam, whereas the gold balls are made by the local goldsmith who also puts the piece together. And the suri, top right, is what Valchar called a mini mudichu. It's much smaller, although it's quite similar to the mudichu. The hoop is composed of a chain of very finely braided wire. Now, Ganguly wanted to collect and document disappearing types of jewelry. The Olai Todu, bottom left, is described as almost extinct. Another jewel from the Salem area from Tamil Nadu. Then the Tandati is the very large and spectacular earring, which is hollow and lac-filled, so much lighter than they appear, from the southern districts around Madurai, and is worn with combination with smaller earrings. Again, an important and very common type of earring that previously was not represented in the V&A's collection. A Turia is a distinctive earring type from Upper Assam, symbolizing lotus, very beautiful little piece. And this is the Magha Kundal from Odisha, which were worn by men and were given to singers, actors, and pundits by the king or other high-ranking people. Design is based on the Makara, and the lower example is beautifully enameled and quite heavy. They're made in 2 halves, filled with wax and soldered before being decorated with the enamel. Nagali, worn in Western Saurashtra and Kutch by members of the Rabari and Bharwat communities, are a very vanishing type of earring. Some are made of spiral gold wire. This type here are worn by the Devaria Rabari women. And Ganguly wrote that the sharp edges of the hoop are usually covered by thread to protect the woman's ear from cuts from the sharp edges of the hoop. And the earring could also be used to hold perfume. So Ganguly wrote that this type is disappearing from use because of the cost and time involved in making these earrings from gold wire. The Debaria elders banned the wearing of such earrings, and Ganguly wrote that the Nagali are now extinct. So this is my final little story. It's a very interesting story, my favorite story from the Ganguly collection, which Dr. Ganguly gives in her earrings book. I'll attempt to summarize it briefly. It's about a Rajasthani earring type, and it shows one example of the way that traditions change. So Dr. Ganguly began with a pair of these earrings, which she read and heard were worn in pairs by women. But then she also had a single large piece, quite similar to this one, but it's this one shown, but without these pearls. And that had been sold to her as a male ornament from Rajasthan. And you'll notice the impressive granulation and wirework on this earring. She then found this earring in the Jodhpur Bazaar, and near Jodhpur at Balotra, she was advised to go to nearby Asadia or Asada in Barmer district. She found some elderly Chaudhry men sitting together. At first, she wrote that they were suspicious, but when she showed them the earring, they opened up and tried it on, although only one man's piercing remained open enough to attach it. So they told her that the earrings are called Bawaria. The Bawari is worn singly in the upper part of the left ear, and the men told her that all Chaudhry men around Asadia wore this ornament up to the 1970s. When shown the pair of women's earrings that I showed first, that she had bought, they disapprovingly said it was a Naya design, and that the earring above was never worn by women. As a result of this research, Ganguly was able to identify a spectacular earring in the V&A collection as one of the Bawaria earrings. It was purchased in India by Caspar Purdon Clark in the 1880s, and it had been catalogued as a pendant from Bombay, which presumably means the Bombay Presidency rather than the city of Mumbai. It was also described by Thomas Holbein Henley as a pendant, so neither had recognized it as an earring. So Ganguly's collection not only expands the collection enormously, but it also gives a lot of important information about the pieces that were originally, which are already in the V&A's collection before hers were acquired. So I'd like to finish this talk with a bold and simple, but I find extremely elegant design. This is a Vedla from Gujarat. Bhattaraj Ganguly wrote that types of Vedla are highly specific to particular communities. This pyramidal type with its long stem is worn by Ahir women in Kutch. 2 to 4 may be worn in each ear, precise details varying according to location and community. And all this information is recorded meticulously by Bhattaraj Ganguly in her catalogue. So while the accession of the Ganguly collection could be seen as a return to the wider and more extensive contemporary collecting approach of the late 19th century at the V&A, her effort to build a truly representative collection of the earrings and nose rings of India represents a much more comprehensive approach than the V&A Museum's tendency to cherry pick what it considered to be the best designs, largely ignoring some types of ornaments such as nose rings, which were felt to be less useful in the West. At the same time, many of her pieces represent the values of beauty and excellent design which inspired the V&A's Indian collections at their beginnings in the 1852 exhibition. So thank you very much for listening.